Good evening, everyone. I'm Akush Lapinder. Well, as promised, the Prime Minister will tonight deliver his third report to the nation, the final for the year. The prime time address will update the public on matters related to land and energy reform, the environment, general infrastructure, digital transformation, and modernization. It's expected that the report will highlight major reform efforts underway to digitize and modernize government services and the implementation of a system to clear the land application backlog and restructure the application process for Crown land. We're told an overview of the extensive ongoing roadworks program throughout New Providence and the Bahamas, major capital works projects, progress on the New Providence landfill, and environmental conservation initiatives will also be highlighted. The report will be aired on various television stations, including right here on Jones Communications Network's TV 14 at 8 p.m. The push to clean up Norman's Key decades-long image as the base of operations of German-Colombian drug lord Carlos Jolita in the hands of senators, who today finally began debating a resolution to develop a five-star proposed development on the acreage once owned by Leader's company and confiscated by the Bahamas government in the mid-1980s. In February 2002, the then government agreed to sell the land to the proposed investor for $1 million.
The resolution, in effect, it has two purposes. One is to give certain minor rights of way without transferring title over government land for like golf carts, etc., or walkways, and more significantly, to transfer to the developer just over 8 acres, 8.6 acres, 8.488. So 8.4 acres of land from the government. In return, the developer will transfer to the government 8.6 acres, so we get 0.2 acres more.
Attorney General Senator Carl Bethel stressed the importance of such developments to young people throughout the Exuma Keys.
It is guaranteed to young Exumians and also Bahamians from other islands, in particular Long Island, the Exuma mainland, and other islands in the country, a very good quality of life, and we hope and trust that this development will contribute in a positive way again to the economy of Greater Exuma, which is both the mainland and the Keys, and of course other islands whose sons and daughters will come to hopefully work and play a role there.
The opposition has thrown its support behind the resolution. Members of the upper chamber also today dealt with first readings of several pieces of legislation, namely an amendment to the Royal Bahamas Police Staff Association Act, a proposal that speaks to the election of board members, as well as the Commercial Recreation Watercraft Amendment Bill. The opposition leader, Philip Davis, sharing his predictions ahead of the 2019-2020 budget coming to Parliament. Philip Davis anticipates that having abandoned the Christie administration's well-considered plans to modernize the country, the government's effort to mortgage the assets of the state to benefit foreigners, friends, families, and political cronies will only intensify.
They have decided to, 1, transfer public buildings to a fund created by Holowesco partners to minimize the ability of other Bahamian individuals and entities, such as the National Insurance Board, churches, and ordinary Bahamians, from renting to the government. At an estimated $400 million price tag, one can only imagine the windfall the Holowesco partners stand to gain from compounded interest payments alone.
Mr. Davis goes on to point to revenue being down against projections at the end of the third quarter because of what he calls an ill-considered 60% increase in value-added tax and the government's meddling with the gaming tax structure. The dismantling of the Revenue Enhancement Unit, well, another poor politically motivated policy as far as he's concerned, adding that there was over $400 million in uncollected taxes and hundreds of high-end properties unregistered, leaving taxes unpaid.
As this government is both arrogant and indifferent to human suffering, all of these institutions have been forced to do more with less, and the governmental organizations, which in the past have relied on government subvention, now do so virtually alone as a result of no adjustments in their subvention to account for the 60% increase in VAT that was imposed last year.
And as for the working poor, Mr. Davis says the outlook's bleak as the government refuses to increase minimum wages despite increasing taxes, significantly reducing the poor's small income. He then sees the government as having 5 options: increase taxes and/or fees, drastically cut recurrent and capital expenditure, borrow from the central bank, borrow internationally, or find any excuse to abandon its failed policies.
In light of the foregoing, we in the PLP have no confidence in the ability of this FNM government to put politics aside and bring to Parliament a realistic and practical budget, taking into account the reality of what is happening on the ground and literally in thousands of Bahamian households. We say again that the country would have been better off and better served had the FNM left in place many of the policies they inherited from the PLP government.
The 2019-2020 budget communication is set for Wednesday, May 29th. And opposition senators accusing the government, meantime, of being out of touch with millennials. You know, the tech-savvy 18 to 37-year-olds who are expected to make up the largest voting bloc come the 2022 general election.
You still have some baby boomers leading the millennial generation. And how could you connect to us except you have some millennials a part of your team, and I mean actually at the table. So if you look at how this government has set up their cabinet, they had young persons that ran, they had young persons that were selected to represent various constituencies, but those persons did not get a seat at the actual table where the decisions are being made. And that's the people that can connect with the millennials, because they would tell them, wait, instead of trying to sign off another hotel deal, millennials actually want to be entrepreneurs. So how about we bring some industries in here and try to find ways to build more young entrepreneurs in the Bahamas.
And according to political newcomer JoBeth Colby Davis, the only way to correct this disconnect is to give millennials an opportunity to make decisions.
When Pinland was in power, Pinland was representing a generation of, first, women wanting to vote. He was representing a generation of men wanting to vote who didn't own land. He was representing a generation of persons that wanted to work in the banks and didn't just want to be housekeepers. He was representing the taxi cab generation. So he connected with all of the average Bahamian stories because that was the group where he came out of. Remember, he was young. He wasn't always old. So when he represented, he connected to the people in the country and their needs. So you have people who are not really connecting back to the millennial generation that they represent.
When asked if the Christie administration was out of touch with millennials, here's the response the PLP Senator gave Jones and Company host Wendell Jones.
I mean, in some ways, it probably was a disconnect, but I think that a lot of persons that I speak to, even now, who may have even supported the now government, are saying stories like, well, I felt like I got more when the PLP was in power. I felt like my needs were considered. I felt like they were doing things for us to make it. You would hear stories on the street now of young persons saying, boy, I've never been this frustrated. I've never been this broke or this scrapping for ways to live and how to live and 3 and 4 or 5 jobs. And so maybe their policies in some way connected to the point where the younger generation felt like they were actually surviving through the time.
Mrs. Colby Davis was added as a new face to the PLP's parliamentary team following its defeat at the polls in 2017. You're watching JCN News. Stay with us.
This segment of the news was brought to you by Alive.